Morning, and welcome to the SCMC June virtual program, 8 Things Every New Museum Professional Should Know About Fundraising. My name is Zinnia Willits, and I'm the Executive Director of the Southeastern Museums Conference. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a light-skinned white female with shoulder-length reddish-brown hair, which I have straight today, even though there's high humidity down here. I'm wearing black-rimmed glasses that are often referred to as cat eye style, and today I'm wearing a black and white checked sleeveless blouse, and I'm in my home office with a virtual backdrop of the SCMC logo on a desktop computer screen. A warm welcome to all our members joining us today, as well as those who may be new to SCMC. SCMC is a regional professional organization representing museums and museum staff in the 12 southeastern states, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have a membership of around 1,500 and continue to grow. I'm pleased to continue our 2021 virtual program series with this talk focused on fundraising, a topic that can apply to all museum professionals, no matter what your role. First, a huge thank you to the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation for the significant support they have provided to SCMC over this past year to make these programs possible and allow us to keep them free for all to attend. Also, thank you to Aaron Banks of Banks Creative in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, the talent behind our promotional graphics for SCMC. As always, just a few housekeeping tips before I introduce our speaker. This session is being recorded and will be available on the SCMC YouTube channel by the end of the week. Closed captioning is available for today's program. You can turn it on via the CC button at the bottom of your screen and just make sure to enable the auto transcription feature. A written transcript of today's session will also be available as soon as we can get it edited. I'm certain there will be many questions for our speaker, and I encourage you to put them in the Q&A box so that we can keep track and address them at the end of the program. While this is a Zoom webinar and your cameras are off, you're all still here, and I encourage you to speak freely and engage with your colleagues in the chat, which will not be captured in the recording. As I have said many times before, while the C in SCMC stands for conference, it also stands for community, and it's so nice to have all of you here today. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Linda Wise McNay. She is the founder, owner, and principal consultant with Our Fundraising Search in Atlanta. She has completed more than 15 years of consulting and has served more than 175 clients. Linda's nonprofit background includes work with both higher and secondary education, the arts, human services, and faith-based organizations, and has included working capital campaigns, annual funds, planned giving, membership and development, and executive searches. Linda has also been working with SCMC for several years as a fundraising consultant, helping us plan strategies for long-term sustainability of many of our programs, including the annual meeting and the Leadership Institute. You can learn more about Linda from her full bio, which I will post in the chat shortly. I'm so thankful to Linda for your time to have devoted to this topic and this session, and for all the support you and our fundraising search have given SCMC over the years. Now I am pleased to turn the floor over to Linda McNay.
Thank you, Zinnia. I am so delighted to be with you today and for this wonderful session. I only wish that we could be in person. But since we can't, I have a couple questions for you. So if you could run that first poll, please, Zinnia. If we were in person, we would probably go around the room and introduce ourselves. So for now, would you please answer this question? How long have you been in the museum field? The answers are 5 years or more, 1 to 5 years, or less than 1 year. I'd just like to know my audience. So if you can complete that, and then we'll have one more question after that. So I assume the results will pop up there in a second. So I can tell you a little bit more about me while we're doing that. There we go. Is that everyone?
Yep.
Okay, so, more than half the people have been doing this more than 5 years. Okay, so maybe We have a great group of people, experienced. Thank you for doing that. So we have one more question. I'm interested to know if your primary role is fundraising or if you have other responsibilities. So let's run that second poll. Is your primary role development and fundraising for your museum or arts organization? And the answers are yes, no, or partially. It might be helpful to you to know that during my many years of experience, I was the Chief Development Officer at the High Museum. So I feel your pain. I've done what you've done, and I think that's helpful to our arts clients. So 64% of you are not in fundraising, but yet you're here and you want to learn about this. So only one person in our group is a fundraiser for their museum. And then a few of you have partial responsibility. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. All right, well, when I was at the High Museum of Art, we had a great time. It was a good time for raising money. We raised about $95 million. And one of my very favorite stories I can share about that is I had been at my children's school raising money, and I raised money in carpool line. And when I got to the High, my very first trip was to Paris because we had this wonderful partnership with the Louvre. And for 3 years, we brought great art from the Louvre to Atlanta to share with our constituents. And then we shared those same exhibitions all around the country. We also shared the High Museum art all around the state and the rest of the US. So you will find that I am big on collaboration, and I'm so glad we are all here to share with each other today. At the High, we also executed an endowment campaign and started our first ever planned giving organization. And we increased membership to about 50,000 members. So if you haven't been to the High, I believe it is open, and I am still a member and still a big fan. So today, let's talk about you. And this is what I always share in every presentation I ever do. This is how much money was given away in 2019, $450 billion. Fundraising is big business, and that's why we're all here today. Our goal is for you to raise more money for your museum and for us to raise more for the arts in general. So if you look at this chart, this shows where the money went when people gave money. The largest piece of this pie on the pie chart is religion. It's about 1/3 of the total. And it might surprise you to learn that half the money that was ever given away, it used to go to religion. But now there's more options. As you can see, there's international affairs and environment and animals. There's lots more things for people to give to now. So that's the competition. Education is the second largest piece of the pie. So even if you have educational programs at your institution, the gifts that come to your museum are in the arts and culture. That's the yellow piece of the pie. And that's only about 5% of the total. Now, there is always a lag when we report these giving statistics, and this was from 2019. And just this morning, the 2020 results are out, and you might want to hear that for 2020, giving was up 5%. So now the new total is $471 billion. So that's about 5% more than 2019. The unfortunate news was that giving to the arts was down compared to 2019. So I'm sorry about that, but the areas that received the most money were in human services, and that probably is not a surprise to you. Here's that same chart, but it shows where the money comes from. Now, many of you in your museums have corporate sponsorships, and that makes sense. We did too at the High, but corporate giving only makes up about 5% of the money that was given away in 2019, and it was even less last year. excuse me, corporate giving is not going to ever help you totally raise money for your museum. So where should you be focused? Well, foundations give away about 17% of the total. So you should spend more time writing foundation grants than you should doing corporate sponsorships. But you and your museum director should be raising money from individuals. That's visitors to your museum, members, families, staff, board members, all those people who come to your museum regularly when you're open. So bequests are the fastest growing piece of this pie. So if you don't have a planned giving program, which we will not stress today because that's not for novices, bequests are from individuals, and you add that to the individual piece of the pie, the blue section, 80% of the money that's given away every year comes from individuals. So that's why we want you to think about individuals first and just give a little bit of attention to the other categories. Sometimes your board members don't realize this, and we'll need to explain that. So if you want to be successful in raising money, it takes a few things. You need to be able to articulate your vision and your mission. So if we were together, I would ask you all to go around and tell us what's different about your museum than the person you're sitting next to. So think about that. You have to be able to articulate that, which is almost the same as the case for support. Your case for support is, why do you need the money? You might need to support exhibitions or staffing or a special program. You have to be able to make that compelling. Why should someone give to that project compared to the museum down the road or the hospital across the road? Why do you need the money? How much do you need, and when? And when I say it needs to be compelling, it needs to be clear. And then your leadership, your museum director, your board members, any of your volunteers, and you all need to have that same message. It's what's in writing. It's what's on your website. It's what you're all saying. Now, you can have a different story about why you support the museum. Why is it important to you? But you still have to be clear on why you're raising the money. So that means there's not just one person. So there is one person in our group today that's dedicated to raising money for their museum. The rest of us aren't. The rest of us have other tasks. That doesn't mean we can't be good fundraisers. We still have to be able to articulate the case for support and work with the others who are raising money. You have to participate by giving back. You may not make a lot of money, and you might even had cutbacks during COVID, but that's okay. We all have to make a gift. We can't be good askers if we can't say, yeah, I've made my gift, won't you join me? The board will oversee the fundraising operation, and they need to take ownership of it. I like for the development officer or whoever's responsible for raising money to create a plan to share with the board and let them vote on it, to accept it and to own it. This written plan is critical. I guess I should have asked one more poll. How many of you have a fundraising plan? You'd be surprised how many times I work with a nonprofit and they don't have a plan. You have to have a plan. We have to figure out who are our prospects and how much we're going to ask them for and how many events are there. It's not just a calendar, even though a calendar is a part of the plan, but it starts with the case, defines who the leaders are, helps you train them on what to say, and then you implement the activities throughout the year. So if you are not responsible for it, you should go back and ask at your museum who has that fundraising plan, and it should be helpful to all of you, and you can see where your part of it could be. Now, fundraising for museums and arts organizations is unique. When you're open, you have daily opportunities to meet with your guests who come to the museum. And not everybody can say that. You need to have strong annual support. That's the money that comes every year. That can include membership. Sometimes it's difficult to have an annual fund and membership, but we have to be in the habit of soliciting people every year to garner their support so that you can remain open every year. Sometimes there's competing interest within the museum. I mentioned the annual fund and membership. Sometimes there's friends groups for particular collections. There's docents. There's people who want to do something special that's not necessarily in the budget. We all have to collaborate and make sure we don't ask any prospect for too many times during the year. Now, fundraising is a very difficult job. If you are not the development officer, just know that when you have one that's doing a nice job for the museum, we all need to help each other. It's such a difficult job. The average turnover rate is 12 to 14 months, and that's not good. The longer someone is in a role like that, the better job they're going to do. So we want to do everything we can to find the most qualified development officer possible and then be nice to them. That's what we tell our clients. Now here's some vocabulary that should be helpful to you. The annual fund is just what it sounds like. It's the operating money that keeps the doors open, keeps the light bill paid, and employs all the employees. It's annual operating and it comes every year. And you should be able to find out from your CFO how that money comes in, how much is normally membership, how much is what people pay at the door to come in. So then you can set your fundraising goal appropriately. Major gifts are larger than annual fund gifts, and they don't necessarily come every year. Major gifts can come every year at a higher level, maybe $1,000, maybe $10,000. But in order to be a major gift, it's larger than usual. Major gifts can come to annual operating, or they can come to special projects, or they can also be included in a capital campaign. The capital campaign is bricks and mortar, and we're not going to get into that today because that is not where most of us start. We don't start working on capital campaigns and building buildings, even though sometimes there are projects that will add on to a building or renovate. We might have opportunity to do that in the near future. Planned gifts, you would think planned gifts would be any type of gift, but they come at end of life, and that's when you ask people to put you in their will or make some provision for when they're no longer there. And as I mentioned, most organizations start with the annual fund, and when they get pretty good at that, they start raising membership levels. They might have a capital campaign, and then eventually they'll start talking about planned gifts. But it's an opportunity. You check your own website for your museum. Does it include, yes, I'd like to know more about making a gift in my will? Is it on the pledge forms? Is it part of the case for support? Not everyone is a plan giving prospect, but you won't get any plan gifts unless you ask for them. All of us probably have events. The only thing you might want to do is try not to have too many of them. We used to have them to begin an exhibition and during an exhibition and after an exhibition, and we just went, I felt like we worked every night. Now, some of us are not having events yet. Hopefully we'll get back to that soon. And we're not going to talk in detail about how you craft an event, but it should be part of the overall fundraising program. I would caution you that you don't try to balance your budget with just events, because it's easy for museums to think only in terms of big events. You might have a gala every year or some bigger event, and maybe one or two small ones. You just don't want to have too many because they are very, they take a lot of time when some of the other methods of raising money don't take so much time. Most organizations need all of these, and we call that a comprehensive campaign. You've got to think about all the different ways there are to give when you craft your fundraising plan, and you can see where you could be most useful in one of these categories. What we all want to remember is giving back is all about relationships. It's not necessarily about the money. So think about who you know that who might be able to contribute to your museum if you ask them. We call this the development cycle. It is not a vicious cycle. It is just a development cycle. And you can start at any point on this circle and continue through the process. Let's think about starting with research. Let's figure out who are our prospects. Let's figure out who knows them and then learn a little bit more about them. Then we're going to cultivate them, invite them to the museum, invite them to something that you're doing special. Then we're going to actually ask them, and you can't forget about that. Just because you've engaged people, they're not going to think about giving unless you actually ask them. And if you ask them, you need to give them a chance to respond. They're going to say yes or no or maybe later, and then you have to do the follow-up. If they make a gift, we do stewardship and say thank you very much. We put their name on the wall or include them in a special event for donors, whatever's appropriate for their level of giving, and then we start again. It's never over. Fundraising comes around every year and it continues. And hopefully your donors move up to higher and higher levels. This is a solicitation staircase, and it is the actual methods of giving. And it starts with the least effective up to the most effective. So where should we be spending our time? In the middle to the top, maybe? So I put events at the bottom on purpose, and it's not that you shouldn't have events. You shouldn't try to balance your budget based on events. I'll give you an example. If you were to have a golf tournament and it rains, you raise no money. You just want to make sure that when you run events, you run them very well and that there's no risk. You don't spend more than you actually bring. You can have news items and newsletters. All that's important to talk about, whether it's your annual campaign or a capital campaign. But just because you print information about it, if there is no ask and no follow-up, money doesn't necessarily come in from that. You can say, dear member, in your letters or in your emails. That is not very effective. It's much better if you say, dear Linda, thank you for your gift last year of $100. Would you consider $150 this year? So anytime you can make it personal, you'll get a better response. In fact, if you send a letter to people, you can expect maybe a 1 in 10 response if they've given before. Now, moving on up the list, if you do something more personal and you call them, you can expect 1 in 4 people to respond positively. So, doesn't it make sense? We should call twice as many people as we write because we get a better response. If you do a combination of mail and phoning, you get an even better response. And you have to know your audience. Some people like to be solicited one way. If you call my mother, she's not going to give you money over the phone. She probably won't even talk to you. But if you write her a letter, she might. So you've got to know who's in your audience. You can raise money with a small group of people, but it is not as effective as if you have a personal one-on-one meeting. And that's at the top. That's the very best way to raise money. If you're in a group, if you ask a group of people, okay, before you all go home tonight, we need everybody to give $1,000. That might work, especially if you've had people in the room who are going to pop up and say, oh, I'll do it. And then other people jump up and agree with them. But if you have somebody who says, no, I can't do that, and here's why, then you lose the whole group. So you can tell people about a project in a small group and follow up with them individually if you want a better response. The best way to raise money, as I said, is in person, and you're going to ask somebody, would you consider a gift of $1,000 for our project? And then you wait and see what they say. And then you have a 50-50 shot. They're going to say yes or they're going to say no. And if they say maybe, maybe they need a little more information. Maybe they have to check with their business partner or their spouse. You give them time and then you follow up. Sometimes people will say no, and I don't usually hear no. That's just how I've been trained over the years. So that means I might not have asked the question correctly, or maybe I wasn't the right person to ask. I try to change it up and then go back and try again at a future date when it might be a better time. So you can use a combination of all these in your fundraising plan, and you should. You shouldn't just do one activity. Now on your board, they should all make a gift to the annual fund, and they should make your museum one of their top 3 giving priorities. Most people give to their church, which we talked about. They might give to their college or university. And then if they're going to be on your board, you should be number 3 if you're not higher. I had somebody who was on my board one time, and he was on 17 boards. What kind of a board member did you think he was? He was too busy and he had too many priorities, and we definitely were not a priority. So we would have been better off having a different board member who could devote time to our projects. You should ask all of your board members, especially if they've been on your board for any length of time, to consider putting in their will for 5% of their estate or for a specific number. If they've invested over time and they really care about you, they're great prospects. If you have a capital campaign, all of your board members need to participate. If they don't, you won't have a very successful campaign. You have to be able to report 100% giving from your board at X amount of money. They don't all have to give the same number. They just all have to make a gift, and you can report those totals to foundations when you ask them for grants. And most foundations will not support projects if there's not 100% board support. That's in the annual fund and the capital campaign. All board members should also participate in fundraising activities, which means it's our job to train them and make sure they've been through a presentation like this so they can know the same information that you do. Now, here's some of the things they could do if they're not comfortable asking for money, besides making it one of their top priorities. They can help you find prospects. They can introduce the head of your museum to top prospects that they know. They can help cultivate gifts. They can ask. They can host events. They can host stewardship events where we say thank you at the end. They can support programs by their attendance. They can write thank you notes or make thank you calls. They can be advocates for your museum, whether or not they're actively soliciting. And then it is their fiduciary responsibility to make sure if you raise money that you spend it the way you said you were going to. How many do you have a development committee? I hope every one of you do, because that's the folks that can help the development officer raise money beyond the board. Now, you don't have to be on the board to be on the development committee, but it is usually chaired by a board member. And it is their role to help with the fundraising plan in its entirety. They don't just tell the development officer how to do their job, they help. They can help plan for special initiatives, and they can solicit each other. It's their job to solicit the board. It is not the ED's role, and it is not your job, and it's not the development officer's job. Peer solicitation is the best. They can be active in identifying and cultivating. So you've got the board and you've got the development committee doing all these activities. And they're the ones that are going to help you meet the goal. So why do people give money? Have you ever thought about that? The number one reason is because they were asked. So it is our task to figure out who knows them. We're going to ask them in person. We're going to get the right person to ask them for the right amount of money, because we also want to ask for a specific number, give them a target. We want to ask for the right project. If they don't care about endowment, then we won't ask them for that. We'll ask them for something else. If they don't like contemporary art, we'll ask them for a different type of art. We have to know about our prospects to be good solicitors. And then we want to know how they're doing. Have they had a death in the family? Have they lost their business? There could be all kinds of things going on with them. And it is our job as solicitors to know our prospects. And then when we ask, we're more successful. So this is the way giving usually works. I believe that everyone is a prospect. And we talked about that earlier. Everybody who comes to your museum is a prospect. And we want to ask them for an annual gift. Those are usually smaller. And then after 3 years or so, we're going to ask them to increase their gift and move them up into that major gift category. And your definition of major at your museum might be different than your neighbors. So let's say that we've gone now from $25 to $150 and $500. Now our major gift might be $1,000. And then a few of those people will be planned giving donors. So not everyone is a candidate for a planned gift, and not everyone can make a major gift, but everyone is an annual fund prospect. So I can't see the chat, but are there specific questions that you want to ask now before we talk about those 8 things? What we've done so far are basics for fundraising for any of us, and now we're going to get to what you as new folks should know.
I don't see any questions yet, Linda, but before we get to the other part, I have a few.
Oh, okay, great.
Just as we're sitting here, you and I have talked about this many times. I'm curious what your comment is. Why is there such a high turnover rate in fundraising and development?
Well, I have a theory about that, and you need to know that my background is in HR. So I've been hiring and firing people for a long time before I ever got into development. But the development job is very difficult. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with that, and depending on the organization, there may or may not be a lot of help. So if somebody takes a development job, if they do a good job and they meet their goals and they raise the money they were supposed to, they can go down the street and make more money. If they don't do a good job, then they might get fired because they didn't raise enough money. So at our fundraising search, we help nonprofits find good development officers. We get hired usually when an organization has had a bad hire, or if they can't find someone on their own, then we can help identify what happened to the last person, why haven't they been able to find somebody. And sometimes we have to train the board that it is a team effort. It is not just a one-person job.
Okay, well, there's a question in the chat that I'm going to ask first, and then I have another one, and then I won't derail your program anymore. But it's really, it's just very interesting, everything you're saying. So let's see, the question in the Q&A, any tips on how to encourage or promote a culture of philanthropy at a museum that used to be for-profit and now is a nonprofit?
Well, it usually goes the other way. I haven't seen too many instances of that. I'm a big believer in starting with young people. So we have to educate people. So it's got to be in all your materials, why you need the money. I always go back to case, leadership, and plan. If you want to be successful in raising money, whether it's a new nonprofit or not, we still have to articulate it. Sometimes it takes a while when you have a new organization or a new business model to get people educated, but you have to be clear and consistent over time and keep saying the same message and make sure everyone's on point to help you with that. And then I was going to tell you a bit later that I like to get the whole family involved in fundraising. And it's not just for adult members, but families, and I even help children raise money.
Okay. Well, and just one more question before you move on. I mean, a lot of museum studies programs, I don't know that they have a specific focus on going into fundraising and development and philanthropy in the arts. So I'm just curious, is this just an on-the-job training type of career you learn by doing, or what is your thought on that?
Well, I would like to applaud the folks that are on here today because that's the first step in finding things out. And there are a few resources out there for people to learn about what you do, but you're right, much of it is happening on site. When I took my first development job, I happened to go work at my college. I didn't have a boss who was trained in fundraising, and there was no plan left behind with the person in front of me. So I had to learn by doing. And I did that by checking with my colleagues at similar organizations to see what they did. I joined an organization like SEMC to learn from my peers, with my peers. And then it was trial by error, and you try things and see what works. So it is not an easy job, but if all of us participate, it makes it less of a burden.
What I've always found too, and again, it's I can't make asks for something that I don't believe in, and I know that that's, you know, probably just most of us who work in museums have a passion for the work, so it might be a little bit easier, but just something I found. All right, one more question for you, and before you move on. How do people in, let's say, an education department gain experience with fundraising? It's always a question for management positions, but and perhaps this moves into your second part.
Well, I would suggest if you're interested in learning about fundraising, again, applause, appreciate that, volunteer at your organization or at another organization, and when you got some skills, come back to it. I used to go to the all staff meetings at the high and tell people what we were doing. Here's how we're raising money. Here's how you can help. And it was very powerful. It wasn't just the education department, but there were many other people who volunteered to help. And it was something as simple as making sure they knew what we were raising money for and who some of our prospects were. In fact, you'll never guess who my very best fundraiser was outside of the development department. It was the woman who ran the gift shop. But if you think about it, it makes sense. She tracked who shopped in the gift shop. So she knew who her top 10 shoppers were. And her number one shopper happened to be the same person as my number one donor. So we had a pact. Every time my number one donor would come to the museum, I may or may not have known it, but when she went to the gift shop, the woman who ran the gift shop would call me and say, "She's here." And I would casually walk into the shop and say, "Oh, I didn't know you were going to be here today." And we had a look. That's part of cultivation. And any of us can participate with that. So we want to make sure anyone who comes to the museum has a good experience, and that can start at the front desk, in the shop, in the coffee shop, while they're in there, and in our educational programs. If they have a good experience, they're going to be better prospects and more likely to give back. And we all have a role in that, even if we're not all actually asking. But I would have appreciated it. In fact, we met with departments. We would meet with the education department and learn all about their programs so that we could all effectively sell them and say, here's our educational program. We did the same thing with exhibitions. We knew what all the exhibitions were coming. We would talk about prospects, and many times the curators and the education staff helped us in the solicitation because they knew some of our prospects better than we did.
That was my experience at the Gibbs as well. And I mean, again, that was a staff of 20. And so it was a little bit easier to cross collaborate. But all of those points that you just mentioned, they intersected. You know, I was in the collections department, and occasionally groups of donors being cultivated, we would do a storage tour for them. And you could see the ones that were really interested in that aspect of the museum, in addition to whatever the project was they were being asked to fund. And so that was an opportunity for me to follow up, you know, within the development bucket. I
Right.
sort of inserted myself into a lot of fundraising and development conversations because I wanted to learn.
Well, people that
Um,
are outgoing probably are more comfortable in those roles. But if it's someone you've gotten to know well over time, just having casual relationships with people who attend programs that can
mhm.
all benefit the development department.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So come back to that one. Here's 8 things every new museum leader should know. Now, when I define new, I was thinking those are people who have only been in this work a year or less. But many of you have been around longer, but this still applies to you. You can be a great fundraiser. Any of us can do it. It is not rocket science. In fact, if you can practice saying, would you consider, that is the very best way to ask. And remember to ask for a specific amount. If you're able to be in a conversation with someone or at an event and you can say those words, so Linda, would you consider a gift of $1,000 to our educational program? You can do this. Anybody can do this. If you take away one thing from our session today, it would be these 3 secrets to success for raising money. You have to have a compelling case for support. You have to have people who are going to help in the asking, and that can include you. And then you have to have a plan. We don't just start asking everybody. We don't want everybody to leave this room and go ask the same person because that would be too confusing. There's got to be a plan. If you're going to ask somebody in the development office needs to know that so that they can help coordinate the best person to ask for the right amount of money for the right project. So do not go out and start raising money without checking in with the development office. That could be chaos, and that is not the best way to get started. A better way is to volunteer, talk about the things that are appropriate and available and what you're willing to do to be helpful. I would have loved it if I had staff people come in and volunteer. We should expect the board to be 100%. So when you're with board members, we want to be encouraging and helpful. It probably won't be your responsibility to ask board members. They should solicit each other. But you need to know that this is how we start every campaign. You start at the top with the board, then the executive staff. Employees should all be participating. If you enjoy your job and you love it there, you should be giving too. It doesn't have to be a huge number, but it's participation. I just told you my story about the woman in the gift shop, and there were many instances of other people being involved. It's just good business to maintain those relationships. The High Museum is part of the Woodruff Art Center, and for years after I worked there, I would get a call from the woman who ran planned giving for the Woodruff Art Center because she coordinated gifts that would come in for all the divisions, including the High. And she still would call me and say, well, Linda, so-and-so has passed away, and we just got a planned gift from them, and I wanted you to know because I know you worked on that gift. So it took a whole village of people to work on some of those gifts. It took a long time for them to come in, and they were practicing good stewardship by letting the rest of us know how those gifts came in and how they were put to use. And it was, then I could write thank you notes too to that family. Everybody's a prospect. So when we sit here, I encourage you to think about who are 3 people you'd be willing to ask for money. Then go back to your museum and check in with the development team and say, I know these 3 people really well, and I'd be willing to ask them for my pet project. Is that okay with you? They'll probably go with you and help you, or they might say, you know what, they're a prospect for a bigger gift. If you'd wait, we'll help you do that next year. Everybody, you know prospects, you just think you don't. Unrestricted giving is the most important money because that's how we run the museum. It's just not as sexy as other projects. You might have a pet project that you know you can sell, but it doesn't do any good if we can't open the doors, if we can't pay the light bill. So if an individual is only going to make one gift to an organization, we want it to be unrestricted to the annual fund. And if they can give more or give a larger gift, we want a portion of that to be unrestricted, and then they can give to whatever else they want. And we should all be united in that. It doesn't do any good to take a $1,000 gift from the annual fund and put it in this special project. Because next year, if you don't have the special project, then you might not get the $1,000 back. We all have to be united. Unrestricted giving is the most important. It's also the hardest sell. But if you can get somebody doing that, then it's easier to raise larger gifts for special projects too, not instead of. And finally, giving goes in cycles. So those of you who, all of us, have been affected by COVID, I don't want you to worry any more than you have to, because I was raising money after 9/11, and it was difficult, and the museum was laying people off, and things were difficult, but giving came back after that. People were still giving money after 9/11, but they were given to disaster relief and not necessarily the arts, and it took a little while for giving to come back the way it was before 9/11. In 2008, we had a downturn in the economy, and it was very difficult to raise money for the arts. My board members would call me and say, Linda, we're still going to give, but we're going to give less. I'm going to give to the homeless. And I said, well, you know what? You should. And we had to make adjustments, but then giving came back. And we had tremendous exhibitions and wonderful opportunities for participation at the museum. And now we've had COVID, and I know museums are struggling, arts groups are struggling, and giving to the arts is down because people are giving to the greatest needs, which could be other nonprofits. But it will come back if we can hang in there. I know our budgets have been reduced. Giving will come back. It'll take a little bit longer for the arts, but don't give up. It goes in cycles, and it will again. So that's what I wanted to share today. If this was helpful to you, I have one more slide I wanted you to see. Our presentation today is based on this book. There wasn't a resource that I could find on fundraising for museums, so I actually wrote one for my clients, and I'm told it is helpful. It covers many of the things that we talked about today in more detail. So for example, if you need to do a capital campaign, there's a whole chapter just on capital campaigns. So it might be a useful tool for your museum. And then I mentioned earlier, there was not a book for children. My nieces were raising money for their school, and I helped them learn how to raise money in about 5 minutes. So I looked around for a book to teach them more, and there wasn't one. So my colleagues and I wrote a book on giving back for children. It's called The Adventures of Phil and Thropy. Those are 3 little children who set about raising money and giving back. I believe it's never too soon to start teaching people about giving back. And this might be very appropriate for your education programs. You can involve families and teach kids. That's how we teach the culture of philanthropy, is if we start early and consistently over time, help them learn. So what other questions do we have? Sorry, I'm getting back to the last slide. This is my contact information. If any of you have any further questions after today, I am happy to address them. And then Xenia will have the PowerPoint and the handout available to you in addition to them.
Yes, I will share with the list. We've got a few more minutes in the hour, so if you have additional questions, go ahead and pose them. But one of the things I wanted to just sort of get your opinion on, you talked about doing the research and getting a full picture of who the donors are. And one of the things, again, I come to these conversations from a collection standpoint, was how important it was to let the development department know when a significant gift of art had been given. And then I guess maybe if you talk a little bit about internal databases that, to capture all of this information and how departments should be working together.
Well, there should be one master database that includes all giving. Doesn't matter if it's an in-kind gift or a gift to operations. So if there is a gift of art, that needs to be recorded in the development office, however else you would do it within the collections database, so that the person can be given credit for that. You don't necessarily put a value on that, but everybody should know when that kind of activity takes place. So if I'm the donor, I'm going to expect people to know I made a gift of art. However, I value that with my tax attorney, but it also should be included in my total giving. So for the year, I might have become a member, I might have given $500 for an education program, and I might have given a piece of art, which was probably less than $5,000. But that's my total giving, and that's what individuals need for their taxes. So we are interested in the total donor, and there shouldn't be multiple databases. I've worked in organizations that had 4, not just 1 or 2, but 4. It's too confusing. Donors expect you all to know the same information, and we all need to be able to say thank you. Thank you for your contribution of art. That's very important to this department.
Thank you. That was my experience as well. It's just in some museums, the departments are so siloed that working together on that full picture, it gets lost in translation. We do have another question in the Q&A. So when you go to make an ask, what sort of information should you have ready to share with your prospective donor? What format should it be in? And is there a good resource to see examples of this type of thing? It's a great question.
Well, I'm guessing it depends. That's the consultant answer. It depends on who you're asking and what you're asking for. Museums tend to have prettier materials than others because they might be featuring art, but you don't have to have fancy 4-color brochures. You just need to be clear. So if you were going to raise money for let's say an educational program, when I go see somebody, I need to know before I go their past giving history, so I can lead with, thank you so much. You've been giving, or you've been a member for 5 years, and we really appreciate that. And I know you gave to X last year. Let me tell you about what's important this year. We're working on this program. And then at the end, I'm going to ask them, and I'm going to leave behind a document of some sort. It can be a letter that describes just what I told them, or it can be a brochure, doesn't have to be fancy. Or if they ask me a question, then I'm going to send them back something the next day that answers their question with a document that explains what they needed. You can go without information and send something later if you don't have what I call a leave behind, but you always want to go in knowing what an individual's done before. And if you want to know more about them than what might be in your institutional database, just Google them. There are other resources that organizations use for donor research. There's a cost to that. But if you just Google yourself and see what shows up there, you should be able to find out basic information on people and where they live and families. It's all available. It's all public information. It shouldn't feel creepy at all. We need to do our homework before we go in. And then while you are visiting with somebody in their home or their office, you should also conduct donor research. I pay attention. I look to see, do they have photos of grandchildren or pets? What are the names of those? Were they in Rotary? Where do they work? All that information is important, and you want to bring that back and share that with the development office so the next person that goes has the benefit of that good information.
Thank you, Linda. That's great advice. We're just about at time, but do you want to just talk briefly, because you are our speaker for July as well, and sort of taking this conversation into the next direction, and some of our attendees, now that they have the basics, may want to come back next month.
Well, I do hope you come back. Today was pretty basic. I call it Fundraising 101, and it's for people who are not necessarily doing development as their total job. So hopefully that was helpful, and now you're informed and you can collaborate with the development team at your organization. We're going to talk a little bit more next time about what's happening currently, and it's a little bit more detailed on how we move forward. If your organization was closed for a while, hopefully now that things are opening up, you'll be back. What should we be expecting? What are the trends that we're seeing? We do need to remember the basics. So we will have a discussion of what should we be doing now. I can tell you, if you haven't been doing good stewardship, it's not too late. My husband and I support a number of organizations, and during COVID, they all have continued to solicit us, but only 2 of them have called us to see how we're doing. So who do you think I'm going to go and support going forward? It's those 2 that reached out to us. So this is a great time for doing stewardship, and that's a great way to get involved in development, is to make those thank you kind of calls. This is a critical time on how we move forward, and I'm projecting by Labor Day that lots of organizations are going to be back. Capital campaigns are going to be back. They took a pause 15 months ago, and there will be a huge changing of development positions. People are going to be coming and going. Some organizations laid people off at the beginning of COVID, and now they're going to go, oh, we can't raise money unless we hire people back. So the more of us that are trained and willing to participate in fundraising, the better. So I hope we have a great conversation next month as well.
Thank you. We very much appreciate your time today. I learned something new from you each time we talk, and I know those who are on the call and those who will watch the recording will also get the value of all of your experience and knowledge. So next month, the program is on Tuesday, July the 13th, again at 11 o'clock Eastern. This recording will be available by the end of the week, and I will send everyone who was registered for today's program the PowerPoint and the handouts. So thank you very much, Linda. Everybody have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.